All right. Hello, everybody. I'm David Zuckerman, Lieutenant Governor and candidate for Governor of Vermont. And here we're having another roundtable conversation as we've been having for the last number of months on a range of topics here in Vermont that hopefully some of y'all are interested in. Today, I'd like to welcome you. We're going to have three amazing women with me today who are going to talk about the political and social justice work they're each doing, the systems that discourage women and parents from public service, and the unique perspectives that are missing when our representation isn't diverse. So joining me for this rich conversation are Jubilee McGill, a candidate for the Vermont House in the Addison 5 district that includes Bridport, New Haven, and Weybridge. We've also got Emma Mulvaney-Stanak, a candidate for the Vermont House in Chittenden 6-2 district, which includes a section of the north end of Burlington, and Kiah Morris, who's the Rights and Democracy Movement Politics Director and is a former representative from Bennington. So I'm going to welcome you all and say that I'd like you each to take just a moment to introduce yourselves and tell the viewers a little bit about your background and what motivates you to be engaged and active in your community. And I'm going to start with Jubilee, and you got a minute or two, go for it.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Hey, everyone. I'm Jubilee McGill, candidate for state rep in Addison 5. I have worked in housing equity for several years, first in affordable housing, and now in my work at a local emergency shelter. And it's really been my work there and my own personal experiences with poverty that made me decide to run. Been an activist with Rights and Democracy pretty much since the beginning, and realized we can't just have a vocal movement to get things like a living wage and paid family and medical leave passed. We need a robust body of legislators inside the State House who are part of this movement. In 2018, the Republican in my district ran unopposed, and it was looking like it was going to be the same in 2020. So I just knew that if I was committed to seeking justice for all Vermonters, then it was my responsibility to step up and run.
Wow, very inspiring. Thank you. And excuse me, Emma, why don't you talk about who you are, what you've done, and why you're running?
Thanks, David, and thanks for having this forum on this great topic. It's a true passion of mine to get more women in elected office up and down the ticket. So yes, I'm Emma Mulvaney-Stanak. I'm running in Chittenden 6-2, which is part of the Old North End and part of the New North End in Burlington. And I'm an organizer, activist, and mom. And that really has framed my lived experience so far on this planet. And I think it's a really important viewpoint that's lacking in the State House, to be honest. And it's one of the motivations for me to run. I have served on the Burlington City Council in the past as a proud progressive from the Old North End. And I've been an economic justice professional, if you will, an organizer for my entire career, first at the Vermont Livable Wage Campaign, advocating to increase the state minimum wage the first time. So back in 2005, we got a cost of living adjustment added. Was one of the first in the nation. And now we have so much more still to do on that particular issue. And then I spent most of my career as a labor organizer with the teachers and support staff in Vermont at Vermont NEA, and I covered the whole state in that position. And so it really informed the three reasons why I'm running are fundamentally around economic justice and dignity for all. So whether you're still working or retired in Vermont, you should have economic dignity. No one should be struggling to meet their basic needs. And then the second being around education equity. So looking at how we fund education. So bringing back in that economic justice theme, but also really looking at equity issues up and down within the system of education to make sure that all students, and I mean all students, succeed and that there aren't racial disparities in success outcomes, that there are not bias and discrimination against LGBTQ youth. I myself am a proud queer lesbian and grew up in central Vermont. There is a lot left to do. Let me emphasize that. Even in 2020, there's a lot left to do to make our schools safe. And then finally, as a mom, I'm really running to make sure that there's a lived experience in that building with people who have young kids, because the conversation changes on paid family leave. The conversation changes on things like affordable childcare when people are living through it. And we need more folks in that building who are living through it to help make decisions.
Great, thank you, Emma. And Kiah, why don't you round us out? And you were a representative, so you can reflect on that a little bit as well. But what's the work you're doing now, and how are you helping women and diverse candidates run?
Well, it was really, I think I appreciated what Emma said and kind of pulling off of that. It's because of the lived experience that I had serving in office, recognizing the very clear disparities between folks that were in that building, who is heard, who is not heard, how successful you're able to be within this position is so based on so many different barriers that are just not visible initially if you don't actually interrogate them. And my goal in this work that I'm trying to do now, that I was doing while in the State House, that I've been doing ever since, is really trying to continue to pull people from the margins to center, and women are constantly marginalized. So there's still a requirement that you have to be wealthy and essentially retired or have this an ability to straddle multiple worlds in order to be able to serve effectively within office. And that cuts out women from various life stages who are needed in those spaces. I remember trying to push forth for a policy around contraception for all, which I'm so glad that we were able to make happen in Vermont, especially considering all the rollbacks that have happened federally, and having these conversations with legislators, many of whom were older white men who didn't even understand the basics of the female anatomy. So having to actually give people the perfunctory information that they should have received somewhere in their life up to this point, those who have wives, those who have daughters, and still somehow miss where your ovaries are, those are the types of things where you see a very clear place where women are not only needed at the table, we need to lead, we need to govern, and we will do so effectively. There is too much data to show and too much experience to show that women, when women run and women win, that we all win. So that is what we need to do, is we have to build that bench to get folks to see, I can see myself there, and how can we remove those barriers to keeping folks from ever taking that first step. So I applaud everyone on this call for going through this journey right now.
Yeah, we're in a journey, that's for sure, with so many things going on, but some really exciting opportunities. We actually, I want to thank you all for participating, and on that last note that you spoke of, Kiah, we're going to roll into that because I want to start the conversation focusing on systems, structures, and biases that often prevent women from entering public service. And if you're comfortable, each of you share either some personal hurdles you've overcome, and or if you've heard of stories someone else has had that you know, if you don't want to reflect on your own. And I'm going to go in that reverse order. Kiah, since you brought that right up, you know, what are some of those biases? You talked about sort of, you have to have wealth if you're going to have a chance, or some other opportunities as women, not all women have. Maybe you could talk about some of the challenges.
So we already know that women are doing 2 to 3 times the work, just in a regular standard workforce, without ever stepping into a governmental role. We are often playing the parts of mothers, caregivers. We're doing so much to maintain our households. Some of us are working 2 and 3 jobs. We may have to be taking professional development and extra classes just to be able to try to get ahead of where we're at. And so the generalized structure of the way that patriarchy and white supremacy has baked in an inaccessibility for women to step out of the sphere of the home and out of the sanctioned spaces of workplaces is very real. And so when you choose to then step into office, there are a few really key things that step in. Obviously, here in Vermont, it's a big deal around money, and that happens to many smaller states. When I was previously living in Bennington, could have gone 16 miles over the border and had that same exact elected position, pay almost $70,000 a year. When you're over there, you get staff, you get interns, you get an office, you get things that help you to be able to function while you're managing way too many hats all at once. Now, the fact that we're carrying this burden does not mean that we are not capable or qualified or should somehow be disqualified or discouraged from stepping in. What we need to do is dismantle the structures. They're keeping us from being able to be at our most successful place. I mean, we definitely know that sexism is going to be a huge part of once you get into that space. You have to know your role. Again, as women step out onto the streets and into the sunlight, there are questions about everything from what you wear to what you do on a daily basis. Your physical features are scrutinized on a daily basis. The tone of your voice is given an extra anthropomorphized characterization of what you're dealing with. And so you're constantly balancing the need to speak with forcefulness, to speak with clarity, and to speak with the courage that mothers hold to being vilified or having your words twisted, having your intentions be morphed. That sense of safety is very real, and especially right now. We are in one of the most dangerous touch points, I believe, for folks who want to step into the light and out of the shadows, to put themselves out there and wanting to run for office. Fascism is no joke, and the militarization of the public is no game. We know that this is happening here in this state, that there are people who do not want strong women who have a direct and clear political agenda to be in those spaces of power. And so to tear you down, to ensure that if you do get in, you are only living a half life. Your family will be scrutinized. Your security, your personal security will be constantly threatened and challenged. Your children will be brought into this. It is not a simple ask of, I'm going to step into something I want to do as a hobby, but it is something that is deeply personal and terrifying. And as mothers, we're going to want to protect our young. We're going to want to build walls around their family. But you can't do that if you need to step into public space. And finally, I want to say as well that as women as well, we also carry multiple identities, whether it be that we're from LGBTQIA populations, perhaps English isn't our first language, perhaps we have invisible disabilities that we need to have accommodated in order for us to be in those spaces. That need to be the strong woman often means that we don't speak for our needs or demand that those needs are met, again, as a requirement for these jobs, because they are jobs and we do get paid and we have to report them on taxes. So how do we set up women to ensure that they're going to have what they need when they step in to be successful in that job? And we have not done that yet as a state.
Thank you, Kiah. I'm going to head on over to Emma. You get to follow that.
Yeah, well, I'm going to build on it because there's no need to repeat. I think one of the things that women do best is that they don't mansplain or repeat. They amplify, hopefully, and lift up other women. So yes, on the economics, yes, on the sexism, and yes, on this damn safety. I mean, it is real. And what I will add is, before I mention a couple other points, is that virtually none of these points are issues that men remotely have to consider before they think about running for office, before they think even running for school board, let alone state representative or governor or what might be. And I really want to emphasize that, because there's a psychological burden that women have to go through in order to even get ready to run, let alone make the decision to run. And so a couple things that I want to also name is that and it's come out in this race already, and not in my race particularly, but in other races in this particular cycle, is the whole idea around who's qualified to run. And there's a very dangerous narrative out there that puts women in this position often. I've not really heard it ever used for men, around what qualifies you to run for higher office, that you must run for something lower down the ticket before you're qualified. And the reason why that's a dangerous narrative is that most women, as Kiah was saying, are dealing with multiple jobs and multiple roles, et cetera, and don't have a lot of capacity often to run for lower office, don't have the economic means to afford to run for an unpaid position like school board or an unpaid position like select board. And yet if you create this unattainable expectation, it's not a rule, but expectation by whatever the kind of the dominant culture is, that you need to have run for something before you could possibly consider running for state senate or lieutenant governor or governor for that matter, you immediately disqualify half of the population for the most part. And you also minimize and devalue the experiences, the very real experiences and skill that women bring to the table. There's so many transferable skills that women bring, regardless of whatever they've ever been elected before. So that is a big one that I hope that everyone can really learn from this cycle and interrupt in the future. The second one are the three words I hate the most, which is wait your turn. I was told that in my particular competitive primary here, and it is infuriating, honestly, because what happened to democracy? What happened to the healthy ability to primary and the healthy ability to ask people to consider, more than just the incumbent? We all know there's the power of the incumbent if you take political science. But if we say wait your turn, women will be waiting for centuries more or decades more. And especially in the higher levels of office in Vermont, we know we have a gender balance problem in Vermont. We know we have a gender balance problem, especially on the federal level in terms of who we elect. And so when we say wait your turn, that's a huge barrier, and we have to stop saying that. We have to stop even thinking that that anyone has the right to kind of stay in that position just because they're a good person or they're an incumbent and they're doing a fine job. The last one I would just say, because there's two actually, childcare, but I think that goes without saying. Women do a bulk of the child rearing and caring, and if we don't have access to affordable childcare, or frankly, like a place to bring your kid to the state house, if you're an elected person or a staff person or an advocate, how are we possibly going to help people be able to actually work? We know childcare in general is required to make the economy work. Well, newsflash, it also is required to help elected people do their jobs and advocates do their jobs. But the one I want to end on is because I think it helps explain why there aren't a lot of women raising their hand to say, yes, I definitely want to run, is that you will find mostly women in political organizations or thinking around running for office, doing the non-glorified work in political campaigns or the non-glorified work in advocacy groups. And that means like all of the grunt work, the work to get the mailings out, the phone banking, the whatever, helping the candidate run. And yet the people who are usually paid or thought of when election recruitment time comes are the men. And I think we have to flip that and recognize and value all the work that goes into political work and see the women who are doing a lot of the labor to, make our democracy work, and think of them first before you think of, men to run. So those are just a couple thoughts I have around, what there are real barriers out there.
Great. And Jubilee, first time candidate, I think overall. Emma's been in the city council, but yeah, what are some of the barriers you had to figure out how you could overcome to be able to run?
Yeah. I mean, I was once a young single mom living in poverty. So it's felt like to get from there to here, there's been a significant number of barriers. And I've often felt like very behind most people in terms of where I'm at in my life. So, all of these things they've mentioned really speak to me, especially the financial piece. For me, it was, I've already got my budget figured out for if I do win, because it's a cut for us in our finances. And it's going to be hard. But I also know it's extremely important to be there, and childcare. It was funny, Emma mentioned, it's like men don't think about these things. And I've had in 2018 and this cycle, men who were like, yeah, you should run, and trying to figure out all the pieces, and childcare was the hardest. And they're like, not understanding why, just you'll figure it out. It's okay. And it's like, no, I have 3 children whose lives I need to ensure are, they're in a safe, healthy environment. So, I mean, it's hard to follow both of that. I think they really covered it. One bias that I've come up a lot, and I've seen other women, and it sounds like so ridiculous because it just seems, like so blatant and obvious, but the being like, well, in 2018, when I chose not to run, I heard a lot of, well, that's probably best, a mom needs her kids. And so these, there's all these systemic issues that we don't see as much, but there's still all these big, blatant representations of bias that we need to tackle as well. And these are from like progressive male leaders I've heard this from. So we really need to be holding ourselves accountable as well.
Yeah, it's interesting.
We've all got these biases, I think.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump on
No
your
worries.
conversation. One of the things that was said earlier, I was thinking about back during civil unions, when the women who were legislators would often get cornered by walls of men shoulder to shoulder who were opposed to civil unions. And a number of us sort of had to come up with creative ideas, and we would literally sort of reach over people's arms and shoulders to break the space open and say, Representative X, can I talk to you about Bill H422, to create an avenue for them to get away. They were physically being held in place, not by hands, but by a barrier. And that didn't happen as much with men who were in the building. There was just a different level of respect from those people who were sort of pushing their position. And so not only in running are there barriers, but even in serving, there's some barriers. And earlier, one of you talked about the pay difference. I think, Kiah, you talked about the pay difference. And people don't realize, I think many Vermonters regularly, I surprise folks when I point out that as legislators, there are no benefits to the job of being a legislator. There's no health benefits. There's no, child care payment. There's nothing helping you with those areas that, again, are often impediments for women. And I do want to just throw out there, I do think it's 100 times more so for women, but I will say that going statewide, one's personal life does get scrutinized quite a bit, almost no matter what. I've been asked a lot of questions about my daughter during this race around a particular issue. And my spouse is like, it's private business. I have answered those questions, but you get your children get scrutinized. And I think that's a lot harder often for women than it is for men, and probably asked more often of women than men about how are your kids going to get cared for or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, if I may, real briefly, David, that's something that I heard many people, many women who wanted to run for office that were afraid to do so and wanted to talk to me about that safety and security. Because again, it is not even just your immediate family. Those who wish to have harm and harm you can get access to you through your extended family. They will reach out and find information about your parents. They will find out about your siblings. No one is safe in this world because they have an army of folks who are looking to tear down those who are trying to step into these places of power. This is real. This is very much real. So, we need to shift things so that our folks are able to do this, because we need our people in this work.
Absolutely, and these are great points, and we can flow with where it goes. No need to apologize for adding more. This is all part of what the conversation's about. Many of you already went into some of your experiences, so I don't know how much more you want to go into, but as parents, as being female, as a woman of color, as being queer, all of your different experiences that bring into this conversation, sort of what do you feel are some of those different perspectives each of you bring as individuals, not just as women, but your own individual experience? Because we also, while we're primarily focusing on, the 51% of the state that are women, there's further detail, right? You're not all the same as women. You each have different individual experiences. So Jubilee, I don't know if you want to throw something out there first, and then we'll rotate back the other way.
As I said before, I was a young single mother, so I know what it's like to depend on a housing voucher to be able to have a roof over you or in your child's head. I know what it's like to try and live on reach up. I know what it's like to come up against the benefits cliff and fall over and over again. And I think that's important. We don't really have that voice in our state house. And it's not an experience or input that, reports and graphs and bar charts can really relate to people. And so I think you need those voices, you need all of them. And I think that's how we get the best solutions. If it's just one group of people, kind of a broad group, but it's the same type of people trying to solve these problems, even if it's done with the best intentions, there's nuances, there's things that they can't grasp. And so I think when you've got all the viewpoints, you get better solutions that, will stretch far into the future. Right now, I think we get a lot of Band-Aids that are really creating, problems, just making a bigger issue that our children will have to deal with. So I think it's really valuable to have all of these different perspectives and lived experience at the table.
Yeah, Emma.
Yeah, thank you. I think the big word that it comes to mind is the difference that candidates like, I think us, Julie and I, and Kiah certainly when she served, is that we have our lived experience gives us an urgency that's unlike many other people in that building. And a couple of things come to mind from my own personal experience. So I have 2 kids under 5. One is going to turn 1 on primary election day. Super mom right here. I'm not even going to probably be with him on his birthday, but he's turning 1 on August 11th. And so that means I was pregnant this time last year, and I started my own business about 2 years ago. And as a self-employed person, I was facing, what in the world am I going to do for family leave? I know I had a baby before with traditional employment and had my traditional family leave, if you will, which I still had to fight for the record. But in this scenario, it was all up to me to potentially save up and hope for the best and hope there were no complications for a quick recovery and jump right back on it. And I was only able to afford to basically take a month off and go back part-time after having my second child. And that's because we don't have a universal paid family system in Vermont. There seems to be no other logical, humane policy that seems urgent than paid family leave to me, because it supports so many folks, even beyond those, who are of child rearing age or adopting children. Because hello, COVID, if we had universal paid family leave, how could we could be weathering this pandemic in such a more humane way, where people could take time during quarantine or whatnot and take care of their loved ones in this time of great sickness, frankly, right? So universal paid family leave, until you've been through it, until you are, going down to the dollar to figure out how long can this work, and how fast do I have to, in terms of a woman who bears children, literally throw my body back together so I can get back out there and figure out where to pump and figure out where to, to do that to support my baby. And then not to mention the childcare piece of it, because there's no placement for infants in a very easy way. And who's going to take a 1-month-old? I mean, I can go on for hours about that one, but that one is a very important and urgent one to deal with. The other part I would say is around an urgency of really naming that there are still inequities within our healthcare system, and a lot of our system is around LGBTQ issues. As I mentioned, I'm a proud lesbian queer woman, and even in 2019, that's when I had my baby, right? 2019, there are still moments, so many moments throughout that healthcare experience I had, going through, providers who generally knew what was going on and wanting to be well informed and whatnot, where there are these microaggressions after microaggressions with zero understanding of what was happening. It would be on a form. It would be up at UVM Medical Center on a form. It would be in a statement that a nurse would say or a provider would say that was completely uninformed. And yes, technically we have marriage equality for all, great, but our family laws and our practices and our expectations of providers and healthcare institutions like UVM need to be looked at as well, and make sure that it's inclusive and responsive to families of all shapes and sizes. And we have a lot more to do there. And I think for heterosexual folks, what do y'all call it? Straight people out there, that, a lot of that stuff is just not known, right? You think, oh, well, we have marriage equality for all. So doesn't that just trickle down in some weird, social justice kind of way into all laws? And absolutely not. So there's a lot more there. And if you've been through it, you know what needs to be done. And I think that's a lens I'll definitely bring to the State House. The last quick thing, and it's really complex, so I'll just put it in there into this space, is having folks who have school-age children in the State House with COVID and public education at a sort of a intersectional moment, but more hopefully not a train wreck moment in just a matter of weeks. It will be also incredibly important, so that folks know the uncertainty that's there, the tensions and the worry that are being held, the issues of equity, to make sure that that families who with means are still providing spaces that are informed with equity from the schools, and that we're working with partners with folks in the community to really make sure that we are not leaving any child behind because they didn't have the right pod or the right community available to them during the non-school contact days. There's a lot there, but I think the point I want to really emphasize is that when you have families or when you have electeds, folks who actually have young children, that's a totally different conversation. And I think that's one that's going to be incredibly important as we go into the next school year in Vermont.
Absolutely. And I'm going to roll over to Kiah, but while I do that, I just want to mention we may go a little long, which is fine with me because it's really important, all the things you're saying. But I just want to let everybody know that so far we're pushing our envelope a little bit. All good by me if you're all good with that. But roll it, Kiah. Oh, you are.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for that. So yeah, Emma, I know that life, that was very clear. If I have a child, my child's at the State House, and David knows Jamal was running that place. So I'm like, and if I had a baby, I was going to be nursing on the floor. Those are the realities of asking individuals that are citizens to come into this space. We need you as whole persons, not just as a monolithic individual or a single identity. You are a whole person with whole life, and that comes and is brought into bear into the work that we do. So if I was to think about how, some of my different points of identity had really fit into how I thought about policy, both the promises and the dangers of how that looks and feels in practicality. Being the second African-American woman in state history in the legislature was an enormous honor, but it also gave a lot of folks a place to say, well, she's going to answer those questions. Well, she'll interrogate that. She'll think about that more critically than we will, so she's got it handled. And so it places a sort of, it places too much of an onus on the one individual to constantly have to represent and speak for the needs of communities that you all supposed to be. If you're in office, you're supposed to be in contact with those constituencies. I should not have to be that proxy. And we cannot be represented by proxy. That's also why the diversification of those seats is crucial. It is not a dream. It's not an aspirational thing. It is a reality that is needed here, now, and today. So as we're thinking a little bit more deeply around, I apologize, there's a lot of interruptions happening in this moment right now. So as we're thinking really clearly, around how are we as women, as a woman of color, am I going to show up as a state representative? I am going to hold and bring those critical questions to certain pieces that are necessary, but I can't be that token. And I should not be expected to be that token. That aspect of thinking about what it means, again, as Jubilee was saying, like knowing what that feels like to be on food stamps. I literally didn't know when I was running for office whether or not I was going to have a job, because as I was thinking and perusing that concept, I had found out I was going to be laid off of the job that I had. So I literally had no idea what was going to be up or down. Was I going to need to go back on food stamps and child care subsidy? Was I going to need to get on Section 8? What was going to happen with my life as this capitalistic economy just felt like I was an unnecessary person and that my labor was not desired and was, able to be transactionally moved out for a bottom line. So this is where we're seeing these pieces that are going to be so necessary to bring, and that is so key as we're thinking about that diverse representation. I know we're going to get into that a little bit more and get a little heavier with that and a little deeper with that, but those were things that I felt and saw very clearly. Now, I think it's also beautiful and powerful for people to be able to stand in that identity, because I also hear from candidates, I'm not going to talk about race. Actually, I'm a trans activist who doesn't want to tell anybody that I'm not, that's not part of my platform. But what I learned very quickly, and what we understand, I think, societally, is that there is always someone watching. You never know who is falling behind you. And so to have someone to be able to hold up and say, here's this person standing strong in their identity, they are protected in their ability to stand strongly in that identity, it changes everything. So it's not just that Emma's saying I'm stepping up as a queer lesbian woman, because there are so many others who may not speak about their sexuality, they speak about their queerness, but they're feeling and seeing that. And perhaps they will, because of the fact that she's able to do so with that courage that she's bringing to this, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you.
David, did you know, David, that there's, as far as I know, the unofficial LGBTQ count in the state House in terms of House representatives, out of 150 folks, right? There's 150 folks in that body. Guess how many are out LGBTQ? 100? Or you're trying to guess? Yeah.
It was like
well,
4.
how many are out? Probably one, two. I'm thinking about 4. I know back a few years ago there were 5 or 6, but that were out. But I know there were a few more that were not out.
Yeah, there's several that are.
Yeah, some are not running, but I think in terms of folks who have uncontested races, it's something like at 4 or 5 out of 150. Yeah. So in terms of representation and this real danger of tokenism and thinking, oh, the queer people can just handle this, or the Black people can handle that, I really just want to emphasize that is real. And I think it's unnerving to put yourself out there. I mean, I don't walk down the street and want to be identified as such, but if I'm holding the hand of my wife and, et cetera, then I am, it is a political act of courage every day of my life when I'm out there with my wife. I don't carry it on my skin. And so that is a very different piece I want to emphasize. But I've committed to my children that I want a different world where they don't have to fight the fight of explaining why any level of those microaggressions and those weird questions and those whole myriad of issues that come up when people see to moms, or when they see a queer or lesbian woman running for office or something, what that means. And it does matter. It really does.
Absolutely. And there's different scales of that both danger and leadership and outness, town by town in Vermont, state by state. I mean, it's something we all have to really think about, for sure. And those of us who don't carry that have to work to think on it more and understand it more and be ready to be allies if wanted when necessary. And that's another piece, is like, got to recognize it's when wanted, not get to go be the savior all the time. That's another piece of the male factor. So I'm going to shift slightly. We're going to talk a little bit about the world of COVID-19 and how difficult that is, particularly on families. It was alluded to a bit earlier about schools and how are kids going to be in school or not, and having kids as elected officials, which actually I think all four of us fall in that same category. My daughter was born while I was a rep, and she's kind of grown up there a bit as well, just like you were saying, Kiah. I wasn't breastfeeding, I will admit that, but an experience to have kids at home that are in school age. I know my daughter's really missing the social connections that COVID has just cut off in terms of group activities and hanging with friends, and during the summer, or camps or activity opportunities. I know we're all missing that. We were talking before the show about the flat screen and how tired of Zoom we all are. So I'm hearing from families, all over the state. They're struggling with food insecurity, isolation, mental health, worried about school plans, searching for quality childcare. I think, Emma, you talked about that with your newborn a year ago. What would the three of you be willing to talk about as policies that you think are critical for healthy families and a healthy state in general? It's families, it's economy, it's upbringing, it's socialization, it's a lot of different things. As we're recovering, which we're sort of not recovering yet, as we're living through COVID-19, and how do you think we accomplish them? And I'm going to go to Emma first, because she hasn't had a chance to be first, and then I'll go to Kiah and Jubilee. So I'll give you all a heads up on the order, except for Emma, you get to get it on the short stick, but I'm pretty sure your experience and your goals. So why don't you talk about a little of that?
Yeah, just give me the easiest topic. COVID. Solve COVID, Emma. Yeah.
Well, not solve it, but family.
I'm teasing. I know. I'm teasing.
Okay.
Well, honestly, it is such a complex topic. I mean, and it's interesting because I'm on the board of my local childcare center, and so we went through the real psychological and science level steps that one has to in order to feel like, is it safe to emerge out of your bubble and out of your network to merge in with other families in this case, right? That you don't know what they do on a day-to-day basis. You don't know people's healthcare practices. And so I sort of have a little bit of the advantage of having done a lot of that mental work and working in community with this board that really took things very seriously, and also knew that we have to find this uncomfortable new normal of how to make our society run and our state run, and safe places for children to, in that case, be there for high quality childcare, and now in this case, receiving education. Because I think everyone can agree that people, frankly, many families, for various different reasons, did not have their needs adequately met, and how we had to flip to virtual learning or distance learning, really, over the course of March to today. And there were many folks who were just lost along the way. A lot of families were just completely disconnected due to lack of broadband, due to lack of technology, due to working multiple jobs as essential workers. I mean, there's a whole long list, right? And yet here we are on the eve of school reopening and trying to figure out what is the right approach forward. And, it's interesting, there was a questionnaire somewhere. I was joking how there needs to be a common app for all the questionnaires with endorsed candidates and surveys for candidates. And there was only one survey that asked around the reopening of school, actually, interestingly enough, but it was a forced choice. I think it was Digger, actually. Yes, no, do you think school should reopen? And that is such a limited scope of, I laughed out loud when I was asked that question, because there is no yes, no. There is a have to find the middle path, right? And so I actually answered yes on that, and then tried to really explain the real grayness of that answer, because it is not easy I don't think it is possible just to completely keep schools completely shut down. I think we have to trust science in Vermont. We have to look at our case numbers and have that continually inform what we do going forward. and then really plan beyond schools. It cannot be left up just to schools to figure this whole thing out, because this is a community problem. This is not a school problem. This is a chance for new partners to step in, or existing partners step in more around finding alternative space, finding alternative people to support the educators, to support educators being able to take care of their own health and well-being and their family's well-being if someone does get sick. Because this is a long ride here. This is not going to be figured out in a month, and then school's going to be completely reopened and working totally fine in this new COVID reality. So I really think, just to sort of synthesize here, community partners need to step forward. We need to trust science. And we also need to really be intentional on how we support kids outside the school contact days. And by that, I mean schools helping families. I have my 5-year-old's about to start kindergarten, whatever that means, in a few weeks. And so we're a brand new family to this system, right? And so we don't know anyone. And even families who know each other, I think the school can help intentionally design these learning pods. And if there's more community partners, help to really support community support, so that it's not just left on parents who can show up and be in that space together, but that this is really a community problem and community solution that we can come up with together. It's very overwhelming otherwise to think about it on your own. And when people think about it on their own, I think that's where we start to creep into that, folks with more means start doing their own thing. And I think the whole premise of public education starts to get rocked then, where people without means start to really feel the inequities that will grow out of that.
Thank you. Kiah, you ready to hit the ground?
Absolutely. So sure. So COVID has really hit us economically in many, many places. And so some of the challenges that came up as we were starting to think about this, again, Emma talked about being a small business owner. I had my own private consulting business. All that had to just be put on hold because we had to deal with so many other aspects of our lives, of just even helping to, again, this is what we do as caretakers, as stewards of our, communities, is trying to care for those who are going to be our most vulnerable. And that sometimes includes right under our own roofs. And so really what that requires for us to be able to get forward. I mean, if I was going to say there was a policy that I think that would be helpful in this moment, can we start talking about some universal basic income? We saw very clearly how helpful it was for so many Vermonters to be able to get those checks when the federal government was going to fall short, which we knew they were. They were not going to come through in the ways that we needed them to, which is why elections matter. We also needed to know that on our state level, we also have protections that we put in place. There's things that we can do on a state level to help support Vermonters, and our state was committed to trying to make that happen. And so those little boosts did make a difference. The ability for people to get access to loans through private foundations, I think that was key for that public-private partnership in order for anyone to make it. There were many artists. There are folks that are doing in the gig economy, as they call it, that were able to stay afloat for just a while longer, enough to come up with some mechanism to pull up and move forward. And it's not a bootstraps conversation, and it's not a show your true grit. This is around the fact that there is a human dignity that's required, and that we've been paying into our government and paying into our society for the entirety of our lives. And this is that time where we need to cash that check back. So I feel like when I'm thinking about where we're going to move forward with our responses to COVID, obviously our healthcare has to be addressed. We are still having folks that are falling through the cracks, that are not able to get the care they need, that are not getting tested because they're not clear about what's available to them or not available to them, are not going to get medical needs met because they're afraid of the financial windfalls that are going to come their way and that may crush them. Because of our broken systems. So I know, I got my thoughts. You have folks on this call right now who are trying to do that, and I'm here to help support and buoy the work of the people to make that happen. But these folks can articulate much better, I think, the things that you all need to hear about what needs to happen when they step in 2021. We started now. We'll get it now, so they'll be ready in 2021.
And Jubilee, you're one of those folks.
Yes. First, I'd like to kind of expand on what Emma was talking about within the education system. I really think we need to, for our children, be focusing on their socio-emotional health so much more. I have a 13-year-old daughter and 7-year-old twin boys. And for my daughter especially, that end of the school year was really, really hard. they're watching the news, they're hearing our conversations, even if we think they're hushed. They're picking up on all of this, and it wasn't being addressed in school. It was the answer I got was, well, we're expecting less of them, so that's how we're meeting their needs. But we really need to give them an outlet, especially if they're going to be home, to be able to talk this through with their peers. So that's one policy I hope to see something gets done about, when our legislators are back in session later this year. I think it's going to be so important because I know from conversations with my daughter, they're struggling, they're all of the things we're feeling, they're feeling as well. And they don't have the same tools yet that we do. So thinking how hard it's been for all of us, just imagine being a child or a teenager and having to deal with all of this as well. And then I also think we need to be looking into alternative learning styles. I think it's been such a rush to return to the same education system we just, we shut down in March, and that might not be the safest. And so we should be looking at ways we can have our children outside more if they return to the schooling, outdoor programs, things like that. I think there's a lot of room that would maybe not cut risk completely, but that will make it a safer environment and honestly a more wholesome, like getting our children in touch with nature again is, really, my children have spent a lot of time in front of screens this year, unfortunately, but that's, part of being able to work and do this. So that's just that. One thing that hasn't been mentioned yet, and I support everything kind of Kiah and Emma said, it was also hazard pay, and it needs to be expanded. I know it's some folks are getting it, but there's a whole group of people who need it really badly and aren't going to qualify. And I think that's something we really need to examine, because even if and when the schools shut down again, they're still going to be expected to go to work. And so they're going to be paying out-of-pocket childcare, and prices for everything have gone up in the grocery store. I don't know about you all, but we're buying the same thing, and it feels like we're spending an extra $100 or $200 a week. And I work with people who have very little. And so that, extra amount of money is not sustainable for them. So they need hazard pay too. That's a really important one. And then I would like us to see, through this COVID, the National Guard food drops of the Farm to Food Boxes program have been like literal lifesavers in my community, at least. We go to every drop and pick up lots of food and are distributing it around our community. Families we work with at the shelter and do service coordination even after they leave us, or to prevent homelessness. I don't know if people, there's some people who haven't even heard of them, but they're happening all over the state, and they're saving lives right now.
The legislature put money in that the governor had not for Everybody Eats, to work with restaurants to produce 18,000 meals a week, which is actually sounds like a big number. It's actually a very small number when we think about how much hunger is out there. But as a way to use some of those CARES dollars to help a restaurant stay open, pay a worker, buy ingredients, some of it locally, thankfully, and provide food so that those dollars are spent multiple times. I'm talking to 3 women who know that the same thing has to get stretched 2 or 3 times over in your day-to-day lives, just your own time, right? That's been talked about, the juggles that you're all working on, and the same is true with those food dollars that we got to get out there. Some folks have said, by the way, that the drops are really good. They're also really inefficient. What if we just put more money in people's hands through, EBT cards and others, and said, you go buy the food from the store? Like, why do you have to go to this drop and stand or be in a car line for 5 hours or 6 hours? But there's impediments there because people think about waste and fraud in government, and it's like, well, what about the waste of sitting in a car for 5 hours? How much waste is that? Anyway, I can go on and on. Sorry, Jubilee, you got me off on that one. So you've all brought some great ideas, experience, obviously a lot of passion to this conversation. And, it's a conversation about the roles of women in politics. It's the roles of how our society is shaped and what it does to both promote overall health and well-being, and specifically impacting on women and women who are trying to contribute and they're trying to juggle everything all at the same time. And I'm going to end the conversation by highlighting some stuff that you've already touched on it, so you may not have to go deep into it, but it's up to you each as individuals, of course. I don't need to give you that permission. But why diverse representation is required for a healthy democracy, and what we can and must do to ensure critical voices, including very much women, are included in those conversations. If you got concrete example of how we as individuals or as policymakers can reduce barriers and create space for more women to serve. So both why is it critical for a healthy democracy, and how do we reduce the barriers and make space for more women to serve? Why don't you all figure out who's going to go first? I'll let you do that in our democracy here. Jump in, somebody.
Can I go?
There you go.
Because I want to hear y'all. I want you to wrap it up. Lovely. So there are some areas that I'm pretty passionate about when it comes to this. And again, this is coming from my direct lived experiences and observations that I have that I think are really key as far as barriers. And as well as when I'm speaking with candidates from diverse populations who want to see themselves running for office. We have to deal with the fact that they're our government, the way that our government functions, it's not just on the state General Assembly level. It goes all the way down to your school boards, are not set up for accessibility. There are individuals from the disability community who are just patently not interested in being the guinea pigs to figure out whether or not the government entities that are supposed to, by law, provide the accommodations that they need to be successful in those spaces will succeed in doing so. We have not changed that barrier. In Nova Scotia, the speaker of their assembly is a paraplegic. So they actually had to even build a ramp to the dais so that they can govern effectively. We don't have those things. And I have individuals with visual impairments. I have individuals with hearing impairments. We think about it only when we think of our elderly and our senior members of our General Assembly, but there are other, again, often invisible disabilities that people don't talk about. And so those folks won't even step in because they have no reason or track record to believe that those things will be met in order for them to govern effectively. But how much more powerful would it be if they were in those dang seats? And with that goes translation services. So if we are going to say that we have a new American community, then those new Americans need to be also in those seats. Correct? Right? They are part of our society. They're part of our community. They are Vermonters just as anyone else. And so translation services might be necessary because between the legalese of the way that policies are written to the actual understanding, even if you have English as your primary language, it could be daunting on different literacy levels even to look at the work that comes at you fast and furious. That has to shift. Other things that I would say quickly, professional development. This is a job. You actually get hired to do this work as a job, but professional development is not baked in. It is a requirement that you, as the individual, have to pay multiple costs up front in order for you to be the most effective legislator you can be. If you want to go and attend conferences, to be around your peers, and learn about effective policy making, there are rules within the General Assembly that you have to pay out of pocket in order to go and then get reimbursed. As a person with family, that's wrong. That's really wrong. And that is a structural barrier that's been baked in that does not have to exist because you will very rarely be rejected on your requests, but you're required to put that up front. Even going in at the beginning, if you were moving in from a different place in the state, for example, within the General Assembly and you're gonna need housing, you have to come up with your month and your deposit for wherever you're gonna rent. The state does not provide that for you in advance until you are already into the system. So that means you have to come up with that money and it doesn't come from your campaign finance funds. You can't use your campaign funds for any of those living needs. So think about what that means for who can't make that happen at the beginning of January, right after the holidays, and they've had to pay out for gas and fuel oil and everything else just to survive the winter. Like, it's just not real. And the final piece that I would say about that again is I think, and I'm sure these folks are here to cheer and talk a lot about what that means to be able to have families and thinking about what that means for family engagement. And so that's not the only barrier, but it is a big one. It is a big one. And so it is not unusual for parents to have to force their children to sit in that state house for the entire week of spring break. They have to sit there. And so there's great recordings of my kid being like, listening to the Judiciary Committee, because it was really, truly boring. But like, that's not how he should be living his best life. And it's definitely not making me be able to be on top of my game because I'm worried about him the whole time. So those are just some of my thoughts that I wanted to bring that I don't know if folks would have brought up, but they're definitely barriers that I want to work to and work with our partners and work with other organizations to change immediately.
Go for it, Jubilee. I see you.
I'm glad Kiah brought up the spring break. She and I have been scheming a legislator spring break like summer camp option for legislators with sessions or with students. So I'm hoping I think that's one thing that we could definitely make happen. COVID has taught us that it's not necessary for everyone to actually be at the State House all the time during the legislative session. I think they got a lot of amazing work done, hard work, and they did it all remotely. So I think we also need to look at different options for people where there's accessibility barriers or financial barriers or, the needs of their families or their communities. And I think it would allow legislators more time in their communities to better represent their constituents. So those are two kind of simpler ones to get up and running. But another one is we really need to look at how we're funding the whole campaign system and moving towards publicly funded elections. And we've got options now, but even if you look at those options, there's still all sorts of barriers built into that system, which is designed to break down barriers. So that is a bigger picture thing that I'm excited to work on, but I think it needs to happen if we're ever going to truly have a legislature that actually reflects the citizens of Vermont.
Emma, why don't you wrap us up here?
Well, thanks. And Julie, I was going to say publicly financed campaigns. I totally agree. I think that's a fundamental on so many issues that come up with public policy and really rooting out some of the not only inequities, but the undue influences that come into campaigns, and also the barriers and the pressures on candidates to fundraise. My first campaign I worked on was a gubernatorial race for a Democrat, believe it or not, way back in 2006. And the amount of money that had to be fundraised to be competitive in the general election, that candidate didn't even have a primary. My mouth still drops at the amount of money towards the end to pay for TV ads, tens of thousands of dollars being poured into campaigns. And it's literally like, it just evaporates. It just goes poof. It doesn't impact a single Vermonter. None of that money will ever multiply in the local economy. It is borderline criminal. And can you imagine a Vermont where every campaign and every election for that matter was funded publicly, then everyone would have access. We would have the ability for, as Julie said, every kind of Vermonter to be able to run, and money would be removed from the equation. It would be a totally different ballgame. So I completely agree on that one. In a similar way, I think we have to look at our election laws around what is allowed to be counted. It's one thing if you have a friendly Secretary of State who says, yeah, if you need childcare during your campaign, which Jim Condos has said that if you're a candidate and you need to use childcare, which we don't really go anywhere, but frankly, I don't know how you do childcare during COVID as a candidate. I would love if someone has figured that out, please let me know in the last 10 days here or 8 days, because I don't know how I'd find a babysitter right now to take care of my child while I was on a forum or a call. But anyway, let's just say once we're through COVID. Right now it's up to the discretion of the Secretary of State whether or not that would be interpreted as an adequate and okay and allowable expense under campaign finance laws. We should codify that to say, yes, indeed, childcare, regardless of who holds that office, is allowed to be paid for by campaign dollars. And then we should go beyond that. And as Kiah was saying, have it extend to transition costs to get housing, to the ability to also pay for transportation, whatever is needed to onboard yourself into that office, including elder care, absolutely. Whatever is needed to help that person be successful in assuming office. And then, the other reality is so much of what I've talked about on my campaign is talking around this idea of modernizing, getting our economy to catch up with the way people work today in terms of gig economy workers and self-employed folks who have that side hustle, and then having things like unemployment apply to them, et cetera. But I think in terms of elections, we have to think in a similar manner. So really thinking around, okay, for folks to be effective in elected office and have no staff and no ability to fund staff is crazy. I mean, how are you supposed to possibly be effective or know it all, right? That's a dangerous setup to have folks be burned out and have folks not be effective, frankly. And so I think, if we really think broadly of what it would take, reimagine what it takes to financially support the soundest group of decision makers on behalf of Vermont, we would totally rethink what they get paid. We would totally rethink how they get staff. We would totally rethink the kind of resources they have to be able to be in that position. And then the final thing, which will probably be like the big bomb here at the end, is I've always said, especially recently, what if men did not run? What if men stepped aside in certain races, right? No offense, Dave, but like what would happen, right? If instead of men jumping up to say, yes, I'll run, and then 4 of them jump into a race or something like that, what would happen if they consciously said, I'm going to sit this one out, and instead I'm going to support and put my shoulder behind and my resources and my mentoring, if they've been elected before, behind a woman to run. And, even if it's down ticket a little bit, I think that'll be such an interesting challenge to say, what would happen if there was this challenge that like 10 men didn't run in certain races? How much more room would there be for folks who are underrepresented in democracy? It would be a really interesting thing to think about and hopefully see one day.
Well, fair enough. On that note, I'll speak as the guy on the show here. But I will point out with public financing, it's an interesting scenario. Just the last reports that were filed, my opponent wrote out their own personal check for 10 grand to keep running ads. Happen to be ads that are distorting my views on issues and attacking me, but not everybody has the money to write a $10,000 check. Just sort of, oh, we want to run some more ads, we're going to write a $10,000 check. So I'm all in on public financing. I think not just at the statewide level, but even more so at that local level, to give people the opportunity to run for those offices that are possibly more manageable, for a word that starts with man, but to run and serve in. So I do want to thank you all. I want to thank the guests for watching. What an amount of time you've given, by the way. We were like 15, 16 minutes over, but I just wanted to, I was really taking in all you were saying, and I hope other people were too. The committee schedules, your life is busy running, organizing, and whatever, to then potentially be able to serve. You all brought that up, the knowledge and life experiences that you have. Thank you so much for all that you were willing to share, very personal information as well. So thank you for that. Just have to do my end of show bit here. We do host these conversations regularly about from legislative issues to the issues that are affecting Vermonters, what the legislature's gotten done, what still needs to be addressed, issues that Vermonters have expressed interest in. If you've got more ideas, please feel free to visit my website, zuckermanforvt.com. Send us an email about conversations you'd want to hear more about. You can also see past shows on the events page on my website, as well as you can learn more about future conversations. You can visit at Zuckerman4VT on YouTube for past shows that we've had. We've talked about healthcare programs. We've talked about school reopening, which came up today. We've talked about CARES allocations and where the COVID money is going around the state, whether you're eligible for it or not, in terms of finding out more about it. Childcare, we've talked about early education. We've talked about the Global Warming Solutions Act, climate issues. We've had a lot of great conversations, and there's more to have. You can find those videos, like I said, on Facebook or YouTube at zuckermanforvt.com. And finally, if you have any thoughts, topics, questions, criticisms, whatever, please send them to me at info@zuckermanforvt.com. I don't know if any of you want to say a closing, whatever. I want to say thank you to all 3 of you. We'll give you each a chance, quick say hello or thank you or whatever, and then we'll wrap it up. Go ahead, Emma.
Okay. Thanks everyone, and thanks for having this great conversation and making the space. It was good. It was good modeling, Dave, of making space for women to take space and talk about a different world as possible for gender equity. If folks want to get more information about my campaign or help out in the last week, I do have a competitive primary. I would welcome you to go to emmaforvthouse.com. You can sign up there to volunteer. You can read more about my platform. That's again, emmaforvthouse.com. That's the same handle on all of our social media channels. So please vote, return your ballots today if you have them. They need to be postmarked and received. And received is the emphasis, is the most important word in that sentence, by your town clerk. So get them there, and you can even drop them off in person if need be. But that's the most important thing for people to remember in the next couple days. And thanks.
Jubilee, another candidate, go for it.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, David, and thank you everyone who took their lunch break or took some time out of the day to tune in. You can go to my website, jubileemcgill.com, to sign up, donate, and get updates about the campaign, or you can find me on Facebook, Jubilee for Vermont. I do not have a primary challenger, so please, in these next few days, find a woman to support and get out there and make calls for her, and then look me up in the general. Thanks.
And Kiah, as the queen organizer of the Queens of Organizing here, go for it.
Thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope that this was a helpful conversation. If you'd like to learn more about the work in rights and democracy, if you're thinking yourself about wanting to run for office down the road, anything like that, getting involved with our movement, you can find us at radvt.org or on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So please do keep in touch, and we look forward to making this movement happen. So when we run, we win.
There you go. Thank you all, Jubilee, Emma, Kiah, for joining us, everybody else as well. We're going to sign off. Thank you.